Hello, fellow do-gooders and friends. I'm your host, Corinna, an activist and cause marketer who's passionate about social impact and sustainability. Today, I am honored to be joined by an incredible leader in natural foods, entrepreneurship, and climate activism, Paul Hawken. Paul starts ecological businesses. He writes about nature and commerce and consults with the heads of state and CEOs on climatic, economic, and ecological regeneration. He has written 8 books, including 5 national and New York Times bestsellers, Growing a Business, The Next Economy, The Ecology of Commerce, Blessed Unrest, and Drawdown. He is the founder of Project Drawdown, Regeneration.org, and just completed his latest work, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in 1 Generation, which is published by Penguin RandomHouse. It is released in the UK on September 14th, 2021, and everywhere else on September 21st. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks so much, and thank you for the introduction. When I listen to that introduction, it sounds like I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, so you know.
Well, I'll join those ranks any day. We have a common thread in our histories. You were co-founder of Erewhon, a natural foods company, and I've lived and worked in that same industry my entire life. I think we even know some of the same people, including Paul Stamets. Oh, and yeah. He's just one example that jumps to mind because, everything he's doing with mushrooms and bees is just incredible.
Yeah, Paul is the elvish genius of the forest. He really, his understanding, his mycological intelligence is astounding, and he's just so much fun to be with because you feel like you're in something from Lord of the Rings, like remember Bombadil, Tom Bombadil?
Yeah, exactly.
He was just bounding around the forest and knew everything and was totally at home in nature. And Paul is very much that way, and he's just spellbinding when he gives talks, and the range with which he understands the influence and the effect of different families of fungi on human well-being and health, on mind, and on the environment as a whole. Is kind of like a gateway to possibility, and I feel like he's my mentor in that sense, because I feel like the whole discussion around climate to this day even, but has been about probability of what's going to go wrong, how fast, when, and whether it's going faster, more wrong than we thought it was going wrong. and it's not going wrong. Climate is perfect, but it's always perfect just the way it is. But what we haven't talked about is possibility, and the cascading possibilities that come from the planet homeschooling us, because that is really what's happening. I mean, we're being homeschooled by Mother Earth.
Yeah.
And nature never makes a mistake, only we do. And what is our mistake? It's being out of alignment with life, with biology. And so people like Paul Stamets and others, that I'm sure what their work is about is alignment. This is how life works. It is incredible. It's miraculous. It is beyond mysterious. It is our understanding of it is just exploding right now in terms of the living world, and we are unintentionally, and in some cases intentionally, but unintentionally destroying it as fast as we can.
Well, isn't that the truth? I'm reminded of something my husband often says to me. We live close to Santa Cruz, right? So when we go to the ocean, he's always saying to our children, never turn your back on the ocean. And the thing I often get thinking about on the heels of that, because every time I'm at the beach or near the ocean, the power of it just is all encompassing. It's an incredible resource to us. And I feel like we've turned our back on Mother Nature, and we need to get back to remembering that we cannot do that for the long term.
That would be a good slogan, never turn your back to nature. I mean, and that is, an oceanic or coastal maxim, which you never keep your eye off it, but yeah, exactly. But not only have we turned away from it, we've lost literacy. We actually have lost what it is, not to say that anybody does understand it in its entirety. We don't, but we've lost that connection
Hmm.
that sort of fundamental understanding. Somebody asked me, and I get this question all the time, Corinna, which is like, what is the most important, what's the number one most important thing, people can do? Tell them what is the most important thing they can do. And I said, that is so American, like the top 10, the top number one, what's number one?
Sound bites. That's all we have
And
time for.
yeah, but there is no number one. But if you press me on that, like really push me on that one, it's like, find out where you live, because you don't know where you live. You may know your address. You don't know whose land, unceded lands you're on, who lived there before you. You don't know that children can name 500 logos, commercial logos, and spot them and name them. They can't name 3 native plants or 3 native birds. And so basically humanity, especially privileged humanity who lives in exurbs, suburbs, towns, cities, or privates, whatever, wherever they live, the point is they don't know where they are. And if you don't know where you are, how can you have any empathy? How can you have any understanding? But most importantly, how can you fall in love with something you don't know about? And we protect what we love. And so the most important thing to do is fall in love.
Mm.
And when you start to understand, that what is outside is extraordinary, in its complexity, far more complex than anything we've created, even regenerative agriculture in its new form right now. I mean, it's being reborn. When I started Erewhon, the book that really made a big impression on me was Farmers of 40 Centuries, which is like, how could they farm the same land for 40 centuries regeneratively? That's how they did it. There's no question about it. They wouldn't have been there that long. But the thing is that regenerative ag is really an emergent technology, more complex than any single shiny object coming out of Silicon Valley. I can tell you that. And because of we don't even know what's underneath our feet. We know a lot is there. We know it's life. We know it's virus and protozoa and bacteria and etc. The interactions are extraordinary. The number of organisms there is in the trillions, just in your backyard or even in a square yard. And that's just the beginning, And so it's not that we need to know all this or name it or understand it. We probably never will. But to have respect and honor it and appreciate it for what it is and what it gives us. And so to me, this idea of regeneration is actually, it's going back to an innate quality that we have as human beings, because every one of us regenerates every day. Our 30 trillion cells do every nanosecond, or we wouldn't be having this conversation if they weren't doing that. We have, if we're parents or aunts and uncles or whatever, I mean, we do it with our nephews, our nieces, our children every day. Our acts of care are regenerative acts, We do it with our families in a larger sense. We do it with our animals, our pets, our gardens, and so forth. We do it in many extended ways. We're always thinking about the care and the life of others. And what we have lost is that sense of care for the life of the whole of our environment, the whole of our ecosystems, the whole of our forests and so forth, because we basically have been, bought into an economic system that basically degenerates life. And what I mean by that is it takes life, no matter what you buy, no matter what service you are actually the recipient of. If you sort of, follow the breadcrumbs back to the supply chain, you will find out that it is destroying life. It is taking life, and that is degeneration. And so really, regeneration isn't an attempt to have a new code word like sustainability or something like that. It's so much to say, can we go back home to ourselves and tap into this, quality that's innate. It's innate to all of life. Life creates the conditions for life. That's what life does, and we are life. And so what would an economic system, what would a social system, what would any system look like if we put life at the center of every act and decision? And that's really what the book Regeneration is about, and the website and so forth.
Wow. Okay. So you have me thinking I need to rename my podcast from Care More Be Better, a social impact and sustainability podcast, to a regeneration podcast.
I love it. You can take it. I mean, I offer the word to you because you are it, and that's what you've been doing.
Well, it's interesting because when I first got your book, what I expected I would see was I expected it to be specifically about regenerative agriculture, because that's the thing that I think is talked about more from this perspective. And then as I paged through it and looked at each section, I mean, that's just one element of what you're talking about. And you really dive into basically every planetary and human problem that we have, many of which are socially related. And it's just, it's an audacious read. But what I love about it, just in the brief time I've been able to spend with it, it came to me 2 days ago on my birthday, so it felt like a really good birthday present, is that, I mean, it feels like something I can chapterize, I can read by sections, I can choose the things that I'm most passionate about from it to really champion as a mantle. Right. And it feels like with the book, I have like an inspirational toolkit to make more of a difference in what I do every day. And so I just want to thank you for that. That's incredible.
You're so welcome. One of the things that you see in the literature, it's well-intentioned literature. The literature is, I have done the research, or we have done the research. We know, you don't. Listen up. Yeah. It's really important. And if you don't do this, we're all screwed. Okay. I mean, this is kind of the leitmotif of climate literature. And I feel like my job and our job, we have a staff, we have amazing staff and researchers and scholars and so forth, is definitely do the research, no question about it. And the science is, I told my staff, I mean, there's 7,000 citations in that book, but they're not in the book, they're on the website, 7,000. So we've done our homework on the science, but science for me is like a floor, this is a floor, and the floors are for dancing. And so the book what the book tries to do is create narratives and spaciousness. And you just named it, actually, by the way you started to look at it, read it, understand it, or see its value to you, which is you went to areas where you're either curious or you're already lit up, or you already have some knowledge, or you want more, or you want to get whatever. And the idea, when I wrote maybe 80% of it, and Courtney White wrote some, and then there's essays, from Carl Safina and Isabella Tree and Charles Massey, some really amazing people in the world, but Leah Penniman at Soulfire Farm in Albany. But the point being, really, when I edited it, was sort of ontologically, there's one of those words you should just throw out, because, but I mean, in terms of how we learn, was to not start at the outset of the book and say everything's connected, which is like, yeah, it's true, but it's a cliche, and it's just like, to me, it's like a new age bomb, like, well, okay, so what? And rather than just going into everything from as complicated as beavers, to net zero cities, to marine protected areas, to fire ecology and these things. And then when you read about them, you think, oh, there's connections within them. You think, oh, that's connected to this. Oh, I never knew that. How interesting. And so that the idea is that at some point, you're going to come to the conclusion like, wow, everything is connected in ways that are so intricate and fascinating. I didn't know that. So you are coming to that conclusion, as opposed to the author or the book saying everything's connected, which is like, yeah, but it just falls flat, that statement to me. But the subject matter doesn't fall flat. It's fascinating.
You have me thinking about Joseph Campbell's work. There was this book I read in college for a literature class of all things. And the professor wanted us to draw connections from one chapter to the next, because Joseph Campbell was really fond of making connections that you wouldn't necessarily see.
He really was.
And so what this professor had discovered in reading it was that the first subject of each chapter was connected to one another. So he basically gave us essay assignments where we would take one paragraph from one chapter and relate it to another paragraph from another chapter. And there was always something that could be drawn. And that's the way the book feels to me. So I love that.
Something is really curious, and I just discovered it recently. But if you go back through my work and you read the last chapter or even the epilogue, so to speak, and you read it, it portends in the next book. And I never realized that. I never realized it, because at the time when I finished those books, I didn't know what the next book was going to be at all. At least I didn't think I did. And so that's another connection. But I think the fundamental cause of global warming is disconnection.
Mm.
We're disconnected from each other in profound ways, and getting more so. We've discovered all sorts of ways to do that, social media being profoundly the most important way we've learned to disconnect the human population. We thought it was going to be the opposite, but it's actually not true. But we've disconnected ourselves from nature, and we've disconnected nature from itself through habitat fragmentation, ocean acidification, pollution, mining, deforestation, etc. So in a way, what we're talking about in terms of regeneration is a profound reconnection, first to self. In other words, you take care of yourself, but you can't take care of anything unless you're doing that. And then you can take care of your family, your people, your friends, your place, your community, others who are in need or want, and so forth. And again, I feel like, we've just, we've balkanized ourselves, our life, our sensibilities, and we're so full of things to do and information, we're flooded with it. But what we've lost is that fundamental connection to our own life. 70% of the diseases in the United States are metabolic, and that comes from eating ultra processed food. And just actually, I call it non-food. In the book, I say this isn't ultra processed food, it's a chemical experiment.
Right.
And we've labeled as food. And then, so that creates this disconnection. And you have these anomalies like Pepsi Cola say we're making all the Pepsi with renewable energy. And I'm saying, no. You're stealing the health of our children. So I don't care what energy source you make it with, you're making the wrong thing. And you're advertising it, in ways that, basically seduce youth and so forth. So again, it's really, I'm not trying to Mao Pepsi Cola. I'm just trying to say, if we look at the world from the point of view of the first sentence of the book, which is regeneration is putting life at the center of every act and decision, we have a different way of seeing the world and what we do, what we buy, what we make, what we support. And I think profoundly what it means to be a human being. And I feel like probably the greatest cause of depression in the world is lack of meaning and purpose.
Lack of connection too.
Yeah, but my life has no meaning.
Right.
I don't have a purpose, And so remember I said, we're being homeschooled by the planet, and it's like a gift, like, you can gender the pronoun she, but it doesn't make, him, her, his, it doesn't matter. The planet is it's an offer from the planet to us and so forth, in that offer basically is to reconnect to where you live, to who we are. And so it's such an interesting time, because I can't think of a life that is going to be more meaningful right now than looking at the news, seeing the headlines, seeing the Northern Hemisphere on fire this year, okay, from Siberia to Greece to Spain to Canada to the United States to California, so forth, to see it on fire, and say, and rather to get anxious and depressed and fearful about it, which is understandable, makes sense, by the way. I'm not criticizing that. But rather than stop there, say, why am I here? And if regenerating life on Earth isn't a lifetime avocation, vocation, purpose, and I don't know what it is. And it gives people dignity, it gives them meaning, it gives them a sense of purpose that is transcendent of narcissism and egoism, of self, of bank accounts. You know, I'm not saying people don't need money, they do, of course. But there's no reason. We've learned how to steal the future and make money.
Right.
Good thinking. Okay, we can heal the future and have income and vocations and a GDP and, you know, prosperity. We can't have, you know, centibillionaires, you know, no, probably not. But we can regenerate this planet and have a thriving economy, thriving in a different way than we think of thriving right now, which is capital accumulation, but thriving in a meaningful way that actually gives us security, gives us a sense of well-being, which is lacking in the world.
I agree with you. Now, we're both in relative closely proximate to Silicon Valley, where technology seems to be our god, so to speak, right? And so many companies, it seems, are springing up to try and create solutions to the problems we face of food insecurity, but without really taking a nod to the earth. And so I wanted to talk to you for a moment specifically about solutions that are being proposed or out there, like the Impossible Burger, but also vertical indoor farming using aquaponics, aeroponics, et cetera, that are getting quite a bit of funding, quite a bit of focus, and really, it seems, are not focused on this solution. It's like, in a way, they've given up on the possibility of creating a sustainable ecosystem and world, and they're going to technology to create proteins out of air. There's an air protein company, or the Impossible Burger, or the 1.1 with Sam Bertram leading them, doing vertical farms in Santa Clara. So let's talk about that. I want your perspective to better understand how you see that laying in and where problems arise.
It's so interesting. I mean, it comes up for me because, you know, I've been started in the food business when I was young, Erewhon, you know, and so and the way it started was interesting because I was there was a food co-op, and not a co-op, but like a buyer's co-op when I started. Not when I was working there. I would start with just people every month came in, we brought it and bagged it and shared it, and people put in the money that it costed, and that was it. And sometimes people would come in between, and we had a few items, you know, in donut bags stapled up, you know, 25 cents a pound. And I loved doing that because I was reading, and I could read all day. And all of a sudden the customer come in and okay, great, okay. But I mean, it wasn't like a store where I had to be at the cash register. I could be there with my books. And one day somebody came into the store and asked me, "How do you know your oil is cold pressed? You know, it's Hain oil." And I go, "Well, because it says so, you know, cold pressed with your." And then, "How do you know your oats are organic?" And I said, "Well, we buy them from Mennonites in Pennsylvania." Come on, Mennonites don't lie, you know. I mean, they're Mennonites, you know. They don't even have a car, truck, you know. I mean, and and when they left, you know, these people left, I realized as a journalist, you know, that I had just lied, in the sense I don't know. And so I thought, well, I'll find out. So I wrote to Hain, and I got a letter back. There's no internet, you know. I mean, you type a letter, you put a stamp on it and send it, and, you know. And a couple of weeks later, I got a letter, really nice stationery, I must say, you know, embossed in this Hain, you know, and said, well, there's really no such thing as cold pressed oils anymore. They're all cold processed, which means that they're solvent extracted, you know, using hexane. And then they're reduced in temperature to 34 degrees, 34 to 36 degrees. And the cloudy parts, called the stearates, are filtered off so that the oil is clear, you know. And I was pissed off. I just felt like, what? I was like, that is just a lie. You're lying, you know. And, you know, I mean, I was a Cub Scout, you know, and a Boy Scout. I was like, you don't lie. It's like, and then a few days later, the truck came in from Pennsylvania with the oats, you know, in these 100-pound bags, and on the, you know, so I was lifting them off the truck like this, and I could see the label sewn into the Bemis bag, and it said National Oat Company, Des Moines, Iowa. I'm going, I think it's 4 bags, I'm going down the stairs in Newbury Street, carrying these 100-pound bags, and I'm going. So after the truck left and everything, I called up the National Oak Company in Des Moines, Iowa, and a really nice woman answered, and, how can I help you? And I said, tell me about your organic farming program, and she said, what? And I said, organic farming. She said, what's that? And I explained what it was. And she said, oh my goodness. She said, well, let me tell you something. We just buy oats and roll them. And it made me so mad, and it just like, not at her. She was great. She was so nice. But it just like, damn it. And so then I got interested in food because I realized it was just fraudulent. This is like, come on, this is 1966, it's fraud, 67, this is a long time ago. And so I then decided to replace every single product we bought and sold from a farm that I had visited. I walked the dirt. I knew the farmer. I stayed overnight. I ate with them. I heard their history. That's how Erewhon started. If it wasn't for that, I don't think, Erewhon as it became or would never existed. I would have done something else. And that was how it started. And so when I see what you're talking about in Silicon Valley, I'm going, it's a very male thing, with all due respect to my gender, which is to solve the problems of technology with technology. In other words, well, that technology sort of fucked things up, so let's have this technology and we'll fix what we did with the last technology, right? And the last technology in food is industrial agriculture, of course, and it still, of course, is absolutely dominant. And so we'll do it, in these enclosed environments, with the vertical farming or these big warehouses and so forth, we'll culture food, we'll grow food, we'll synthesize heme, to make the burgers taste just like a beef burger. We'll actually try to feed the desire people have for fast food. And all of them, to me, plant-based food is great. So, I mean, you look at, say, Beyond Meat, and so that's great. It's like they're, cooking up something that is shaped like, looks like, tastes sort of like, meat. Fine, no problem. It's been around for a long time. Worthington Foods, soy-based foods. It's been around. The monasteries in Japan did this for hundreds and hundreds of years. They still do, really elegant ways of creating fake meat, fake fish, fake chicken, and everything, with basically gluten, and spices and, things like that. So I have no problem with that. The problem I have with the idea that we're going to get our food from indoor farming is that it won't work, number one, and it's very energy intensive, number two. When I say it won't work, I got a call from the China Times, which is a Singapore, not China, I forget where it was, but it's the main newspaper in Singapore. I think it's the China Times, whatever. But anyway, they were talking about they're going to become food sufficient. They were become food self-sufficient, because they were depending on food from old Malaysia and China and so forth. And they have 3% of their land is arable. Only 3% of the land in Singapore is arable. So it's all developed. And she wanted to know about, vertical farming and, all these different ways of growing food intensively, using aeroponics, aquaponics, and I said, tell me what you ate yesterday. I said, why? I said, well, just tell me what you ate. Okay, and it was noodles and soups, and it had beef, and there was fish, and the noodles were made from wheat, and the seasoning from soy, and then there was all these, she just named all the things, and I said, virtually nothing you've named except the cilantro and the basil could be grown in indoor farming. You can't grow beef, animals, soy, wheat, corn, grain, barley. You can't. You can't do it. And so that alone, this idea that we can, and if you want to grow basil fresh and watercress and bib lettuce, and things in town, well, fine. But it doesn't make any sense, in terms of, and second of all, the act of growing food actually can be regenerative. That is to say, it actually brings back pollinators, brings back the health of the land, and you're getting nutrient density. The thing that makes food nutritious is stress. It's called hormesis too. You know, when you exercise, that's stress, and you can become healthier. If you do it too much, you won't be. But stress creates health. The body needs stress, so do plants. So what stresses a plant? Heat, UV rays, drought, cold, insects. These are the things that plants deal with. And what happens is they develop phytonutrients. They deal with it. They change the constituency, the chemical constituency of the plant, or they send their roots down deeper. Their roots get more access to bioavailable minerals and so forth. So the plant has evolved over time with stress. And so now what we're doing is we're talking about putting plants on an IV drip system, right? So you have this fluid going in, you know, with the macronutrients, you know, NPK, of course, you know, and maybe some minerals, you know, or something else, you know, to keep it healthy for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 5 weeks, you know, because it's a very short growth cycle. And it's fine. I mean, who cares if it's basil or, like I said, Bib lettuce, but you don't have a healthy plant. You have a plant that's like somebody on a coma. You can keep somebody on a coma for 39 years, you know, and with drips, but they're not alive in the conventional sense. And so then you've just forgotten what food is. Food is an intimate connection to place and to weather and to the sky and to the insects and to, you know, fog or sun or heat, or particularly that place in terms of the soil. All the soils in the world are different, you know, and plants co-evolved in those soils and so forth. And so there's that, you know, which is like, really? And then you have cultured meat, you know, which is we're going to take, you know, embryonic cells or cells from a cow or chicken and so forth. And then in these very, very carefully controlled situations, you know, in terms of temperature, heat, humidity, nutrient baths and so forth, you're going to grow the cell. And it's true. I mean, the dream of every cell is to become 2 cells.
So they'll grow.
Yeah, you know, so that's you're taking advantage of mitosis. You know, you're saying, okay, it's going to duplicate if we can get just the right conditions and so forth, and you make a chicken nugget. But there is no way that can ever be ecologically, energetically sustainable. It's just not possible, you know. And put aside the ick factor, you know, and putting that aside, whether you want to or don't want to eat it, you know, or what it tastes like. It's just the metrics aren't there. And then you have Impossible Burger, which is, you know, Pat Brown's thing out of Stanford, and with a adamant endorsement and devotion to GMO soy. And so the thing about glyphosate, which is really because the GMO is not to change the constituency of the soy in terms of nutrition or this or that. It's about to make it herbicide resistant. That's what GMO soy is. It's resistant to glyphosate. And now they have new ones that are resistant to glyphosate and dicamba, which is really even a worse, more pernicious herbicide. But putting that aside, the fact is that glyphosate is anti-life. Now, it's just not regenerative, it's degenerative, because glyphosate was invented as an antibiotic, it's antiviral, it's antibacterial, it's, you know, it kills life. You know, that was its function, original function. It does it to this day. And so, so basically you have a burger that's like to stop animal consumption, which makes sense if the animals come from CAFOs, confined area feeding operations, which are just a disaster for everybody. I think the people who work there, the animals who live there, if you call that living, the way they're fed, the manure, the effluents, I mean, the whole thing is just so destructive. Okay, so the intention to get rid of CAFOs is laudable, and I praise Pat Brown and anybody who's doing that, wants to, you know, move us away from that. But to do so in such a way that then basically furthers industrial agriculture, which is basically not just killing the soil, it does kill the soil, but we now know the glyphosate actually is harming us, and that it's ubiquitous. It's like the worst pesticide companies in the world, Dow, Dow Chemical and, and Monsanto, until glyphosate, by the way, Bayer, these companies knew that you never made pesticides that were water soluble. They were always lipophilic. They were fat soluble, which is why you have DDT and DDE and other, aldrin and pesticides in your fat tissue in your body, where actually the body keeps them. They stay there and for a long period of time. But glyphosate is water soluble, so it's everywhere in the world. It's in water, it's in all our food, it's in all our children. And we know that Impossible Burger, or we have heard or we have seen data that suggests that Impossible Burger has 100 times more glyphosate in it than is required or needed to cause leaky gut. That is to cause, which is what glyphosate does, and it breaks through that mucosal membrane, in our gut, and which is just so, it's thinner than a tenth of a piece of cellophane. It's so thin, just a few cells thick. And once that happens, then you have chaos in terms of physical human health, because then you have bacteria, you have organisms that are in the gut, which are doing amazing things, creating serotonin, dopamine, and all sorts of stuff. We know it's our second brain, going into the bloodstream. And that's, there's just a whole list of inflammatory diseases that come from that. And so I find it odd that Impossible Burger is so adamantly devoted to GMO soy. If they said, look at, we're growing like a weed and we can't get non-GMO soy sufficiently, but we'll do everything we can to change that in the next 2-3 years, and say, well, okay, go ahead. Great. Thank you for understanding that this is about life and not about killing.
Well, you have me thinking about a couple of things. One of which is, I think often people misunderstand what GMOs are. And you'll even hear really incredibly well-informed scientists who are expert in their field. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one example. Speak out in favor of GMOs because they think it's going to solve our global food problems, because that's how it's marketed, right? Oh, I need to make this Frankenfish salmon that's going to double its size in shorter time and outcompete other salmon in captivity so that I can feed the masses. And then guess what? That fish they will always escape into the wild. And if they can outcompete the native salmon in that area, then guess what? Those salmon are going to get weaker. They're not going to be able to swim upstream as far, taking nutrients from the ocean into our forests where they're needed to keep the forest healthy. And then this whole cycle continues. It's like the law of unintended consequences is right in central frame. And we're sitting there, supporting it and saying, oh, we want the unintended consequences. We're not going to dig deep enough.
No, it defies common sense. And again, remember I said earlier, we don't know where we live. Okay. I don't think that people who are pro, for example, genetically modified salmon have ever been on a salmon stream.
Right.
Watched the migration, have talked to indigenous people who have been depending and harvesting salmon for thousands of years, that understand that pelagic fish, actually have this incredible molecular memory of where they were born. Okay. And we live in California where, in the fall, they start coming and waiting for the first rainfall. And they're not waiting for rain, actually, they're waiting for the rain to hit the streams and the rivers, that they came from, and to wash into the ocean, and then they sense it, and then they follow that molecular trail, which is extraordinary, back to streams that are no wider than a computer screen, it can be very small and wiggling into the rocks if the stream is still functional and clean and clear, and lay eggs. fry, come out of there and so forth. So the idea of replacing that with something that it's not born. I mean, where was it born, and does it go back? Maybe they stick these fish in streams, and maybe that happens. I'm not sure. I forgot about that, haven't read that closely about it. But yeah, I mean, the other problem is that we need more to feed the world. Well, 70% of the food in the world feeds animals. So it's feeding CAFOs. So we grow plenty of food. We have plenty of farmland. We have too much farmland actually to feed the world. We're not feeding the world. And so this has been used as a kind of guilt trip, like, well, when I started out, and then when I started to get press in this, we were growing, organic food and, all that sort of stuff. And we were mowed again and again and again by the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard and different scientists. And, well, you hippies, you're privileged. You can eat that way, but what about the rest of the children in the world? You will starve the children if we went to that kind of agriculture. And of course, it's the other way around. We're going to starve the children in the world if we continue with industrial agriculture. It's upside down and backwards. But that logic was being used, and it's still being used to this day by industrial ag. The summer we feed the world, and you guys are on your own organic, regenerative, sustainability trip and so forth. But we are the ones who take this seriously, and we're going to take care of the world. And so that's why you have the Bill Gates. You have, again, men think that way. They think that, if we can just create more with, it's not really with less, by the way, but just more, by taking more actually with what they don't understand and so forth, that will solve a problem instead of creating a worse problem that they're trying to solve. And GMOs. I mean, if you're talking about modifying papaya, in Hawaii, to, I forget what it resists now and so forth. It's like, okay, well, whatever, if it works for you, but it doesn't really change the ecosystem. It doesn't change the soil. It doesn't change pollinators. It doesn't change the nutrition of it and so forth. So when we say GMO, the problem is it got conflated with so many different things and so forth, and somebody could make an argument to me about GMO that, like with the papaya in Hawaii, I'd say, okay, fine. I mean, I feel fine about it, not that I'm the judge, but I would say that, but that's not what's happening whatsoever. It is absolutely an enabler of chemical pollution and the degradation and extraction of fertility from the land.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the non-GMO Project seal, right, bears that butterfly, because Monsanto, what do? They put pesticides right in the DNA of the corn. It kills flocks of butterflies. These are the unintended consequences we need to avoid.
Yeah, actually, that was an intended consequence. I mean,
yeah, they intended for bugs to die. They just didn't know it was going to be the butterfly.
Yeah, exactly.
Or did they? Which is worse.
I remember the head of Monsanto, the CEO, Bob Shapiro, was a friend of mine. And he's a friend because he was Buddhist. And so I would see him at Buddhist retreats. We do these, 10-day silent retreats, and Bob Shapiro was there. And so I know people find that sort of, impossible to believe, but no, he was. But then not during the retreat, but before and after, and other times, we talk about it. And it's Bacillus thuringiensis, which is what was sort of, knitted into the corn, which is a natural pesticide. It is actually, it's a natural bacteria. And, but I remember talking to the scientists there, and they knew that it would create resistance. That, in other words, that it actually wouldn't work for very long. They also knew then that glyphosate would create resistance. I mean, it was so interesting. And the reason now you have Monsanto Bayer or Bayer Monsanto and Syngenta and Corteva, the Dow Chemical company petitioning the EPA to authorize dicamba for food crops, which is so much more pernicious than glyphosate as a herbicide, is because glyphosate isn't working. And it's interesting, it's not working against a weed. It's called pigweed, but actually it's amaranth. Actually, amaranth is one of the most ancient foods there is in the world. It goes back 7,000 years in terms of cultivation. Has these beautiful, small, kind of like.
Are they red little flowers?
Well, I'm talking about the seeds, you know, the
Okay.
seeds of the food. I think I forget the color of the flower. It sounds right. But like quinoa, even smaller, you know, and so nutritious, so high in protein, so good. It's, you know, and so that's what they can't kill now is food with glyphosate, you know. And there's a beautiful book. I mean, I'm digressing, you know. I mean, you can snip this out of the thing, but again, when I got involved with agriculture, you know, young as a youth, you know, I mean, my grandfather was a farmer, so it wasn't that foreign to me. But you know, with organic agriculture, I read a book called Weeds by Joseph Kokenauer. It was published during the Depression, 32, I think, at University of Oklahoma. And it was a really beautiful. It's a beautiful book to this day. And what he showed was that if you have this kind of weed, a Canadian thistle, or this or that, and so forth, that the plant is growing there to heal the soil. And that he showed how different deficiencies in the soil then would attract a certain species of plant, a certain family, because they had deep tap roots to bring up minerals because the soil had been demineralized and so forth. That actually, when we look at, you know, oh my God, the weeds are taking over, they're taking over because the soil has been depleted. And so to see them as actually the earth trying to heal itself, to bring back diversity and a healthy ecosystem, you know, rather than, because you never see that in nature. You don't see bare ground except in, you know, desert landscapes and, you know, steep mountains and so forth. But I mean, you know, the earth always wants to be covered, you know, because that is what creates the most life. And so when you get like amaranth, you know, taking over corn fields, GMO corn in the Midwest, it's like the soil going, we're impoverished. This soil sucks. You know?
We're going to bring some nutrients back.
We're going to bring some nutrients back. And amaranth says, I'm here. You know, I'm you know, anthropomorphizing weeds and corn and soil. You know, I'm just for fun. But the point being is that we if you step back and look at it, you go, oh, my soil is sick and it's trying to heal itself, you know.
Yeah.
As opposed to, oh my God, it's a pernicious weed, you know.
Well, so let's get back to climate change and activism for a moment.
Yeah.
Climate change is obviously a big problem. It's the biggest that our generation will face. And so is social activism in a way. It's like these two things are very connected. So how can we move forward from your perspective without suffering from this Mount Everest syndrome where we just feel like it's all too much, give up, go home, and I don't know, call it in, I guess, because it seems like that's what a lot of people are starting to feel from what I hear, just even speaking to people in my community, like, oh, it's just too much for me to even think about.
Yeah, I mean, they look at everything and say it's way past its sell date. They're like, well, first of all, I think we need to talk differently. The messaging around this has guaranteed that it's actually between 98 and 99% of human beings on the planet today are disengaged from doing anything about global warming.
Right.
How could that be? It's been in the public sphere for 45, 50 years. And you say, well, I can tell you why. Because the language absolutely is either incomprehensible or meaningless or numbing, and it just hasn't worked. I mean, you know, I mean, the language around combating, tackling, fighting, you know, it's like, again, my sweet gender males, you know, I mean, that's male language, you know. You don't see a woman saying we're going to combat, you know, climate change, or, you know, it's really men, you know, who came up with that. And men dominated climate science until recently. They still do, actually, but there has been this change in the last 10 years. But so then the language itself was all about metrics and acronyms, you know, and jargon, you know, what does net zero mean? What does carbon neutral mean? What does decarbonization mean? What does mitigate mean? I mean, these words are like, what are you guys talking about? And so people who are inside, who are literate in climate science and so forth, it makes sense. But it's a bubble. They're talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And even within that bubble, very few people do anything. They think that if they're watching a documentary and not Netflix about climate, they've done something, or they do the recycling faithfully every Thursday morning, whatever. It's like they think they're doing something, or they bought a Tesla, which didn't do anything, in my opinion, by the way. So I think that EVs does something, but the idea that we can get a 6,000 pound, $80,000 car, and so forth, and somehow we're addressing, global warming is just kind of like,
Yeah, that's why I opted for the Chevy Bolt.
Exactly right. But so we've languaged it, and then what the science as it came out was about future existential threat. Okay, like, hey, this is coming. We need to do something now, and along the way to prevent what is coming. And basically, what was coming was caused by global warming. And so, one of the things that we have to take out of our language is climate change. The climate is perfect. Climate always changes. It changes every nanosecond. If it didn't, we wouldn't have seasons, food, beauty, and forests, and glaciers. I mean, come on. So climate change is a good thing. Second, the way the climate is today is perfect because it is a response or part of the biosphere itself. The atmosphere and the biosphere are not things where you can draw a line and say, okay, that's biosphere, that's atmosphere. They're inextricably bound. They're the same thing. And so the climate reflects the biosphere. And the biosphere is what we've changed, right? Yes, and our combustion of fossil fuels have then, basically gone up into the atmosphere, in terms of CO2 and other greenhouse gases from other practices, However, so we gotta stop thinking we're fighting climate change, or whatever we're verbalizing to climate change. What we're dealing with is warming. It's just warmer. So it's the warming that's changing the climate, and the climate creates weather. Okay. So we have to understand, okay, so how can we basically stop warming and then reduce the causes of warming so we can get back to a more stabilized climate? The last 10,000 years has been relatively stable. You still get, really interesting climatic events, but not so interesting as they're becoming, and right now is too much. And so that's our goal. And so our goal, again, it isn't about fighting, tackling, and mitigating. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to mitigate today, right? Right? I mean,
nobody.
Or fight, tackle. I was asked about that on stage in Vancouver 2 years ago, about how we tackle, and, it was a man, of course. And, and I said, you want to come up stage here and show us how you're going to do it? Because this is the atmosphere. We're in an auditorium. Where do you think you're breathing?
Right.
This is it. How are you going to tackle this? Show me. What I was trying to point at you, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to say we've languaged it so we've othered it. It's something else, someplace else, and we need to fix it. There's no it there. We need to fix ourselves and who we are and how we live and how we respect each other and life itself. That's what needs fixing. That creates climate. That creates global warming, right? And so we also need to name the goal, which is why Drawdown came out. I said, when it started in 2001, it was a third assessment, and the people were like, same words, mitigation, all that sort of stuff, then fighting, tackling, combating, and I went around to NGOs and scientists and university friends and so forth, institutions, and said, can we name the goal, please? Those aren't goals, those are verbs. I'm an English major, I'm not a scientist, but you don't have a verb as a goal.
That's part of how you get to where you might go, but
might be, but maybe not. The goal actually is to reverse global warming, and that's really important to name the goal. Our goal isn't to mitigate. Mitigate means to reduce the pain of something and the seriousness. And that's what mitigation means, you know. Why would we want to reduce the pain and seriousness of it? It's going to screw us. So we actually want to stop, you know, emissions and start to bring carbon back home from whence it came. It came from here, you know, planet Earth. It didn't come from some other planet, you know. And it's food for the planet. And, you know, this what photosynthesis, what the plant world, what it's what it eats carbon dioxide and splits it into sugar and oxygen, you know, with the use of light. And so, you know, to look at it that way, then second, can we map, measure, model solutions that exist, that we know how to do them, no, not like, you know, pie in the sky and so forth, and see if we can accomplish it. And I didn't know. And I asked for years for people to do that. And they said, we don't know how to do it, or we don't have the funding to do it, or that's not our focus, but it's a good idea. And maybe you should do it. I said, I don't know how to do it either. But that's how Drawdown came about when I started to do it in 2013, 2014, and gather a small team. Amanda Ravenhill, Chad Fishman, Crystal Chisel. I mean, we didn't know how to do it either, by the way. I mean,
you have to start somewhere though, and you got some incredible thinkers together and started to build that solution.
We got advisors, amazing scientific advisors. We got researchers from all over the world and so forth. And I used to go out funding for it. You to get funding. Could you help us? And people just said no. They just looked down their nose at it. You know, a book on books, you know, they would say, well, who's doing heading research? It's Chad Fishman. I said, yeah, he's got a, degree from Oxford. And they'd say, what's his degree? And I said, art history. And I said, he's really good though at research. And they'd say, well, what's your degree? And I said, I actually don't have a degree, but I studied English, again, we didn't have the pedigree, to do it, but we went out and got scholars from all over the world who did, and we call them Drawdown Fellows, and amazing young people, in their 20s, primarily, some a little bit in 30s, just all over from all 6 continents. And we started to work together and collaborate, and that's what created Drawdown. And that's the same thing we did with Regeneration as well, by the way, and so forth, But so to provide people a sense of possibility, and so I feel like what people lack right now, even from Drawdown, and I knew it was narrow in a certain sense. It ranked everything. How much does it cost? How much will we save if we scaled it over the next 30 years, to 2050? And okay, that was the modeling methodology. Is missing there. And what is Regeneration is about is that you have the book. The last 8 pages is called Action and Connection. It is the most important part of the book, by the way. And the first part of the book to me is a neurotransmitter, the literary equivalent of a neurotransmitter. Go to this neuro. And the Action Connection is basically the wormhole to the website. The website has 3 things or several things, but one, the most important thing is called Nexus. And Nexus is the most complete listing and network of climate solutions in the world today. But not just a listing, but is actually how to do it, how exactly what you can do. Now, what you can do as an individual for sure, but as it says, and you probably saw that in the book, there's no such thing as an individual. That's just sort of the ego waking up every morning going, hey, but you actually don't exist as an individual. You exist as a family, as relationships, as a neighborhood, as community, as a church, as a school, as a company, as a your network is so fascinating. That is who we are, and we have agency. Your podcast is agency, right? You're one person for sure, but how many people do you reach? How often? In what way? That is what you've chosen to do. Everybody has agency, and it varies, of course, but the fact is we all do. So we go into those levels of agency, it's like, well, this is what you can do as a neighborhood or as a community if it applies. This is what you can do as a city, as a company, as a school, as a classroom. These are the ways you can affect these challenges like the boreal forest, or solutions, like regenerative ag, or, food waste and so forth, and these are what we call, what in parlance, the bad actors. These are people that are really screwing it up. This is you know, this is the chairman of Procter and Gamble who's cutting down virgin trees in the boreal forest to make plush toilet paper, you know, and this is his phone number and this is his email, and I'm sure he'd like to hear from you if you have feelings about that. You know, so like this is it. So that's influence.
Right.
Really important to influence, not just to be there and, you know, and all the different ways you can influence, you know, and also politicians or legislatures or policies at a city council level and so forth. And then we have what we call the good actors. That is to say, people who are really making a difference. Daniel Nierenberg at Food Tank, amazing what she's doing. You know, Civil Eats is the other website she has in Europe. And so we will list those people, and then we list all the organizations that are just kicking butt. You know, they're just really doing a great job, including podcasts, by the way. You know, if their focus is in that area that solution or challenge is about. And then all the videos. These are great videos. These are great documentaries. These are great books. These are the articles and so forth. You want to know about degraded land restoration? You want to get involved with that? This is the 2 to 3 billion hectares out there that has actually been trashed by industrial agriculture, deforestation, and here's what to do. And it's all links, you know, we're not telling you what to do, it's saying here, it's just a plethora of things going out there in the world, the people, the organizations, the intelligence, the brilliance, the courage, you know, and so forth. And then, so what Nexus does is take you into the world of regeneration, you know, and we're doing it. It's gone. It's happening. It's not like we're trying to start something. We are just trying to honor what is and to bring it to the fore so that other people can see it and they can see each other, you know. And then we also have Climate Action Systems, which is basically a learning pod where you can say, God, you know, I want to get natural gas out of my house altogether. I don't want any natural gas, no fossil fuels in my house or heating oil if it's in the East Coast. And this is how you do it. This is how heat pumps, this is how they work. But I've done it in my neighborhood, which is I'm doing that to my house. And I realized that the plumbers around me didn't know much of anything and they were BSing me. And so I have David, I have Andy, you know, I have other people here, you know, who are homeowners and going, let's figure this out, you know, and we're figuring it out. That's a learning pod. And we have learned a lot. And what we have learned is a pod, and then you can have it. You want Scotts Valley? Here, this is what we've learned. A lot of it will apply to Scotts Valley where you live. Some of it won't, you know, and then you can add to it and so forth. So basically it goes back to cells. The dream of every cell is to be 2 cells. Well, that's what knowledge wants to do too, is to split, to become 2, become 4, become 8, be 16. So Climate Action System is a way for our understanding and our learning, you know, about what to do and how to do it and what works and what doesn't work and all that sort of stuff, to basically disseminate and to proliferate. And then finally we have what's called punch lists, you know, which are charming and funny and you know, but it's basically the 7 things you're committed to doing in the next month, year, 10, whatever. And you know, I have a friend of a friend, and what he does is teach children in refugee camps art and makes murals and gives them paintbrushes, and these children aren't being taught anything. That's regeneration. To really like open this up, you know, to say like, oh no, it's just regen ag. And that's why you thought it was going to be about regen ag. That's why I put it in the middle of the book, not the first one. It's in the middle, like, oh, here it is finally, you know. So that's what to answer a long answer to your question about, you know, what can I do, or do I feel defeated and so forth. It's like, I think of the Wendell Berry quote, which is, be joyous though you know all the facts. So which means, oh, look at the science. Holy smokes, great science. Kind of a bummer, especially if you're 20 years old. You know, it's just, I didn't create any of this. You guys did that. And you're telling me I've got to fix something, you know, your stupidity for the last 100 years, you know? And they're like, so that's a very anxiety promoting, worrying, angry sort of load of information. But the thing is, like, though you know all the facts, once you know the facts, then got it, let's go. Let's work, let's do. And that's what regeneration is about.
Yeah, you know, I got the sense you could pick what you're most passionate about and champion it, because there's some act in here that you can be the master of. And you may not be able to, you may not have the time to do 100% of it, but there's at least one thing you can champion.
Yeah,
now,
and you have allies.
Yeah. And this is getting back to what I discussed with David Johnson when we were talking about the climate problem as a whole. Like, okay, so if we need 1 billion activists and we don't have them, or we're not going to get them, how do we create equivalent change? And so his concept is essentially creating a Greenprint that uses elements of design thinking and some other things in negotiation, et cetera, to essentially build a framework from which a bunch of activists could work on a global scale on one mission that they might all champion together. That seems like it's a lot of the same sort of idea, or a complementary idea to what you're doing with Nexus, et cetera. It seems like it's a portal, a gateway, or a door through which you're inviting us all in to say, here's what I want to do.
Yeah. I mean, David's a neighbor, lovely, lovely human being. I don't really agree. I hope it works. I hope he does it. I support it avidly. But what I don't agree is that what you do is that takes too long.
Mm-hmm.
It's top down in terms of the template, and we have top down world. And see, I mean, men have been in charge for quite a long time, and that's why we're in the situation we're in. And so what we do is create the conditions for self-organization, because that is what your body does. That's what everything in nature does. And so if we're going to do this, I disagree. We are going to have 1 billion activists. We are. And the question is, what will be the catalyst? What will be the focal points? And the reason we will have 1 billion activists is because climate will be the biggest movement in the history of humankind. Not because some charismatic vertebrate stood up and said, follow me. Enough of that. It's because of weather. Just that's it.
It affects all of us.
It affects all of us, and it brings us together, actually. I don't care what religion you are, or this, or what you believe about that, and so forth. We have a common shared purpose and interest now, that is far more important than what might divide us. And so to me, to give up on 1 billion activists is actually I'm the opposite. I'm going for the 1 billion, and then the 2. And the thing about it, Corinna, is that if we really look at the solutions, and I say the solutions in Nexus are everything that's in the book, but it's everything that's in Drawdown, and everything that's in Accelerated Pathways, and other solution oriented initiatives that are in the world. So it contains all of them, okay, not just ones in Regeneration. But the thing about that is that like I said, we need to see each other in a different way than the way we have organized everything in the world. Because, and again, that's why I said by Regeneration, biology is our teacher here. And as I said, if you try to organize your body, you'd be dead, okay? The only thing you can change is what you see, read, eat, smell, smoke, okay? You can change those things, right? You can change the inputs, but you can't change what's going on. And it's miraculous. It is beautiful. It is extraordinary, okay? The human body. One cell in 1 second has more things going on in that cell than all the stars in the universe. So it's like, better not have the Republican Party in charge of your body, right? Or anybody in the other organization. So that's what life does. So we have to think about how can we create conditions for self-organization in the planet rather than, socially. And again, if you look at all the solutions that are in Nexus, and you didn't have a climate scientist alive, and you were clueless as to extreme weather, saying, I have a string of bad luck on the weather, everything's burning, and it's got too cold in Texas, and it's too warm here, and like whatever. All that, you were clueless. You would want to do every one of those solutions because they have cascading benefits for people, for children, for future, for water, for health, for education, for nutrition. I mean, let's do them anyway. In other words, you don't have to have a messianic, or you don't have to, we have to do it because of guilt or shame. And that's what happened with science. It had talked about future existential threat. It talked about, and it tacitly was about fear and threat, like if we don't do this, some bad things will happen, And then activists took that up and they amplified it with shame and blame, pointing fingers, and well-deserved, by the way, in terms of Exxon and Chevron and so forth, and no question. But, fear, threat, shame, blame, and so forth actually do not motivate. They do not create action. They numb you. And most people don't even have the time to do that, in terms of Stop the Keystone Pipeline, which is hallelujah, and bless Bill McKibben, everybody who got involved with that, but so forth. So we have to create something which is really about, like I say, regeneration has big arms, which is, this has created a much better world, a much more fascinating world, and got the problem. We're going to use the problem as a way to transform who we are, what we do, and what we're going to become, as opposed to see the problem as something that is oppressive, that we're the object of it, and somebody did that. I'm the object. That's unfair. I'm mad. I'm going to act out as a victim. Really? The rest of your life, you're going to be a victim? That's a stupid way to spend time on the planet, which is so beautiful.
So, it feels to me like you're talking about essentially pushing from the bottom for change by changing your lifestyle.
No, the middle.
The middle.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's always been individual, the bottom, then the top is conference of the parties, the government, Biden, whatever, going, well, they're really slow. They don't get it, I'm not saying the Biden administration doesn't get it, but I'm just saying is like, and then the bottom is activist, individual. That's what British Petroleum did. They individuated the problem, your carbon footprint. We're just selling oil, or gasoline or whatever. We're doing what you want, you're the problem. Tobacco industry actually discovered that way of individuating the problem. We're not the problem. You smoke. And so that is wrong, because there's only certain things that individuals can do if they think they're alone. And that is the other thing. We've othered climate, othered nature, we've othered each other. And othering is separation, making it separate, And so, no, I'm not saying it's the middle out. 1 billion people is the middle. And that is what is untapped. And that is that 98 to 98% of the world is disengaged. And we have to think, why are they disengaged? It's a good reason. I'm not blaming them at all. In fact, 40, 50% are empathetic. They're sympathetic. They're like, oh yeah, this is really a big problem, but they don't do anything. So that's the gap analysis we're trying to do, which is, okay, why, what is it? What are the obstacles? What's the resistance points? What is the communication lack? Where are we lacking communication? And so that's, to me, the opening, that's there. That opening is so big, you could, it's like a yawning mine opening, again, that's why I see climate as definitely, the changing weather is definitely perilous. It's absolutely perilous, and it's grievous too, the loss and the sense of suffering it's causing, and it's horrible, and there's no question about it. And at the same time, that shouldn't disallow us from doing a 180 at the same time and looking the other direction to what it is telling us and what is possible as an individual, interestingly, because you have agency, not just because you're an individual. And that is why climate action systems and Nexus really opens up that whole world of what, yes, you can do, knowing that there's so many yous out there, and they're your friends, your allies, they care, and that's who we are.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now, I want to bring up one more thing, as I have heard this a few times before, and I've seen it in my environment. When we allow the earth a chance to heal, it heals remarkably quickly, even the climate. So I was hoping you could talk about that for a moment, because I think that helps to give people faith that we can make a difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that piece by Isabella Tree about the Napa estate in Sussex. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, but she and Charlie, her husband, Charlie Burrell, inherited this 3,500 acre estate that's basically a farm and on Sussex clay, which is just awful to farm in, and they tried to redo it and new equipment and new techniques and more chemicals and this, and they lost more money than it was losing before they inherited it, and they decided to take out all the fencing, the ring fence it, and listening to a guy named Franz Vera, a Dutch ecologist, let it go wild. Okay. And they brought back 3 animals, Tamworth pig, a type of horse, and longhorn cattle that pretty much approximated the original inhabitants of the land, 2,000 years ago in Europe. And in the short time, in 20 years, they have more red listed species on their land, the Napa estate, than all the conservation areas in the UK put together.
Wow.
On 3,500 acres. The purple emperor butterfly, the turtle dove, the first nesting storks in UK for 600 years. And they just let it go wild. And nature, it just restores so quickly. You see that, of course, in other places of the world, Chernobyl, you go to look at the Chernobyl right now, the city of Chernobyl. I mean, it's a jungle, it's a garden, there's animals, there's creatures, the biodiversity there is enormous, right? It was never there before, because there's no humans, right? And so the rate at which nature restores itself is absolutely extraordinary. And what we know now, and this is a shift in climate science, which is, it's science is never right. It just moves, it keeps moving, And the assumption was that when greenhouse gases peaked, that they were up there for decades and hundreds of years. They'd stay up there, and warming would not only persist, but it would increase for centuries. And so then you think, well, you're telling me that if we achieve net zero, that we're just going to burn up anyway, and kind of what the science said, And so what's the incentive? And what's so great about the sixth assessment is that they realized that the models were wrong. And actually that when we hit net zero, that within a relatively short time, heating stabilizes and starts to, if we start drawing carbon down, which is what drawdown was about, greenhouse gases, but carbon's the one we can draw down, then cooling begins, And we never knew that before. I mean, we were, if people want to go down the rabbit hole of climate science, I mean, really in depth, it's pretty depressing if you think about, this is here for hundreds of years, and like, well, what's the point then, to do everything? And now we have a goal. And our data in Regeneration show that we can get rid of fossil fuels by 2042 at the current rate. We just saw something today. The U.S. can be 40% solar, not counting wind, by 2035. I mean, it's interesting to know that McKinsey and the IEA, the International Energy Agency, have been wrong about the growth and rate of growth of wind and solar for 20 straight years. They've been wrong. They've underestimated the rate of growth and the rate of the drop in cost. These are the best agencies in the world, the IEA, and no, it's just outpaced it in every way in terms of its rate of growth. So we have to understand that other things are exponential too, not just things that we don't want. And that is the rate of human capacity and change. And when humans are on it, they're amazing. And human beings are on this. So yes, what we face in terms of the weather is foreboding, no question about it. But we shouldn't let that dark cloud occlude our vision of who we are and the best of humanity. And the best of humanity is coming to the fore.
Well, I'm encouraged by the fact that even though Santa's village got torn down in Scotts Valley. They replaced it with condos that are all electric. And when I first saw that, I'm like, what is the benefit of that? Like, it's just all electric. It's all solar run. They are essentially building a building that doesn't have any gas or other fossil fuels going into it. They were all built to LEED certified levels. So, I mean, essentially having a minimal impact on the environment while creating stable places for people to live and grow. So I think that's great.
I mean, if you ask me in regeneration, what's the number one solution, I would say it depends how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, but, you know, so I wouldn't, but the number one solution, if you're just doing, you know, CO2 metrics, is that condo, electrify everything, everything.
Which I thought was opposite at first. Well, isn't natural gas better? I mean, you market
no, it has to be electricity,
you know?
from renewable energy. It has to be solar. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the input has to be renewable, but to electrify everything. And there we go. And when those go up, those engineers, those architects, those city planners, they'll learn something. They learn a lot more. They're cutting their teeth. They learn how to do it better, faster, cheaper, more effectively. They spread that information. You know, we're a learning species for sure. And so those, you know, this sort of, you know, the camel's nose is, you know, slipping under the tent of regeneration. And as it does so, you know, the rate of change becomes, is something I think we underestimate, you know, because we see the headlines, you know, about Bolsonaro and Orban and, you know, Trump, you know, and all these things that go, oh my God, the world is going nuts, you know. And I wouldn't argue that one in that sense, but I wouldn't. It's like, it's true. But that's another podcast. But I do feel like that it obscures what's happening. That's what Blessed Unrest, that book, was about, which is, you know, we don't hear about the 1 million organizations that are devoted to restoring life on Earth and, you know, social justice and indigenous rights. You know, we don't hear about them. But they're out there and they're growing and they're effective and things are happening. And so you just saw basically at the IUCN, the International Union of Conservation of Nature, which is the biggest conservation organization in the world, recognize and institutionalize in the presence, knowledge, and wisdom of indigenous people into the IUCN. Like, wow. That is so important because 80% of the biodiversity is on tribal or unceded formal tribal lands, or lands that are basically occupied and populated by the 5,000 indigenous cultures in the world. And it's a very important part of the book, indigeneity and indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And so to read that today, read that this morning was like, yes, you know, because again, it's kind of like climate was very male oriented and excluded women, frankly, a woman's way of seeing the world, being the world, thinking the world, women's science. And conservation has been a very privileged white person's enterprise, you know, and not, it didn't have the best of intentions, of course it does, you know, but it also had a blind spot, you know, which is it didn't really look at what I call observational science, which is indigenous people are scientists and it's encoded in their language. And we think, well, if you don't have a written language, you're not literate, you're illiterate, so therefore there couldn't be any science. And it's actually upside down, backwards. The Dene Navajo have narratives. These narratives, these songs, these stories actually are basically how they transmit scientific understanding generation to generation. And they have stories that can identify and talk about 700 different insects. Come on, show me somebody who's not an entomologist who knows anything about 700 insects, pollinators, and so forth. So for us to discover that this wealth of understanding and observational science is the science of place. It's not, you know, science, which is empirical science, which is do an experiment, and if you can replicate it, then it must be true. And you know, observational science is the science of places, of pattern, of change, of dynamic, of systems, which is you're looking at it from pattern recognition and so forth, you know. And it never repeats itself. Nothing in life repeats itself. No oak leaf is like any other oak leaf in the world. None, never. Nature doesn't have straight lines, circles, or repetition. And so observational science is a completely different way of understanding the world. And the reason we know these are great observational scientists is they've been in the same place for 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 years. And they learned to live there without anything that we associate with in terms of survival. And boy, did they learn a lot. And boy, do indigenous people know a lot. First Nations, Native Americans, I mean, extraordinary. So just the very fact that we're at that point where not only are indigenous people reclaiming their rights, reclaiming their voice, reclaiming their sovereignty, but at the same time, white people, Europeans, colonists, settlers, or the organizations that came out of that are starting to recognize that, oh my God, the people Darwin called the Yamana people in Terra del Fuego beasts, called them beasts, and they have a language that has almost as many words as Japanese, the beasts, and so, appreciating now, finally, after 500 and some odd years, of terror and murder and rape and pillage and marginalization. And we just saw, what Canada did to children in these Catholic schools, and all that came out of a decree by the Pope, about that really mandated that Spaniards and others, could conquer the world, in the name of Catholicism and so forth, the doctrine of discovery. If you discovered it, it's yours. That was the doctrine of discovery. It came from the papal decrees and so forth. They still have never, ever, ever said that decree was wrong or we'll get rid of that decree. That decree still exists to this day, and so we're living again another point of emergence, in terms of human understanding and respect and honoring, and that we didn't have. We just had our academic science, which is fantastic, by the way. I'm not downplaying that at all. I'm just saying is like, welcome to the world of observational science. Darwin himself, putting aside his characterization of the Yamana people, was an observational scientist. So was Wallace, so was Galileo, so was Copernicus, for that matter. So the great science of the past came from observation, didn't come from empiricism. And so we are now welcoming back in, who are we, but I'm just saying is that the world is starting to reconnect in that way, what we human beings have discovered and known for so long, and now it's being shared in a way that could come at a more vital, important, and urgent time as now.
Well, I think that this interview will send me down quite a few more rabbit holes. Something we didn't get into is my background, starting in anthropology and archaeology. I actually prepared the skeleton of one of Jane Goodall's chimps back in my undergrad. So your book is like a full circle connection to all of this. So I am hoping that we can keep this door open and reconnect again in the future.
I would love to.
I love that too. I would love to end this interview as I end most of mine, which is just to ask this simple question. If there is a question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, what would it be? And if you don't have one top of mind, just whatever thought you'd like to leave all of us with today.
Well, as a person who's done a lot of public speaking, I can tell you questions are gold. For a speaker, as my grandfather said once, he said, son, you don't learn anything when your mouth is open. But when you do public speaking and then you have Q&A, it's like the questions are virtually always emblematic of a lot of other people who have the same question, number one. Number two is you learn something from a question as opposed to just seeing it as an interrogative, and so I would say that I love questions. Every day, what I question is myself, you know, I mean, what are you doing? And the questioning isn't maybe what you might think, which is, are you doing enough? You know, are you, could you do more? That's my workaholic self asking that question, you know. But asking it from a deeper point of view, which is, are you taking care of yourself in a true way? I don't mean in a narcissistic way, you know, like, I got my gym membership, I got this, I got that, you know, I have all these different, no, I mean, in a sense of, again, the word of self-love, in the sense of honoring that I'm a human being, I'm here, and then, because if there isn't that, then there isn't love for the rest of the world, no matter what you think or say. There really isn't. And the Regeneration is the second book in a trilogy. There's a third book, but the third book, I won't give you the title now. I have the title. But the third book, and this isn't the subtitle either, it's about falling in love with the world. And not because I think it's going to change the world or anything, it'll change me. Because I write to learn. I don't write because I know. And so the question I always have for myself, am I actually creating, again, we talked about spaciousness earlier, but the spaciousness for my own being, you know, to honor, love, respect, you know, my family, my friends, my networks, you know, and usually I fail on that, by the way. And but I'm always asking that question, you know, because it conflicts with my sense of urgency, my workaholic self, you know, this is so important, you know, do this. And so that's the question I ask myself, you know. The question I would probably ask in turn, or, you know, or the suggestion I would make in turn, is what we talked about earlier, which is really for somebody to really take the time. It sounds odd to take the time to find out where you live, find out, you know, look at something, you know, and say, what is it? And what started me on my path was I had a family which was not good, and it was not safe to be in my home, house, whatever it was. And I would go outside every minute I could because I was safe outside. I always felt safe. And so no matter what was happening, thunder, lightning, floods, you know, I just felt like, even when I lived in the Sierras later, you know, in those fires, I felt safe. I never felt threatened by anything in nature. But when you're outside, what you discover as a child is you don't know squat. You don't know anything, and you don't know the names of things. You don't know what's making those noises. You don't know what's crawling away when you pick up the rock, you know. And when you're a child inside, you know, you can do the light switches, the TV, the refrigerator, you know. I mean, you master the house like that, you know. It's really easy. No mastery at all, really. And outside, you know, you could spend 10 lifetimes and you wouldn't know you wouldn't master it. There's no such thing. And so what it developed was curiosity, you know, which is like, how does this work? What's the name? Who named it? What does the name mean? And those questions keep, you know, basically expanding. And so to this day, I really am grateful for that, because my books are about learning. They're not about knowing. Yes, or in the case of the last two books, we have a lot of researchers, you know, so we are learning. Yes, of course. But it's really about taking what is and trying to, I'm a step down transformer. I'm not as smart as everybody that I read and the books I read, the sciences I draw from, you know. But I was an English major, so what I try to do is take complex information and make it accessible, you know, because that's what I need as a person. You know, I know, like Paul Stamets, people were just like amazing geniuses. I'm not that person. I'm the person who wants to help, you know, and the way I help is to try to make language accessible and science accessible, and to try to, you know, reconnect, you know, that sense of othering, you know, that is so pervasive in our society, whether it's Me Too or anti-Semitism or, you know, cultural or racial or religious. I mean, we just other everything, and we just hear it, and to actually try to, in language and ideas and so forth, to again create those possibilities for people to see how beautiful those connections are.
Wow. Thank you, Paul. This has been incredible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you do. Really. I mean, care more, be better. I mean, it couldn't be a better slogan for Regeneration.
Well, I'm thrilled you've come on. And I'm also itching to know what that third book is, start to finish. I'm thrilled that I got the chance to review Regeneration before it's out for the masses. I'm loving it, and I'm fairly confident it will live on my coffee table as a conversation piece for years to come. So yeah, it's an honor to have met you. I actually have quite a few questions from our audience, so I'll figure out another way to connect with you on that.
I'd be happy to respond to those questions. You know, I think, again, to me, questions are gold.
Yes.
But your audience is gold. And like, I mean, because those questions will stay with you sometimes, and you realize there's a question like, that's a really good question. You know, I haven't asked that myself, and somebody will raise it and you go, wow, that they're seeing the world from their perspective. How interesting. Not just, I don't mean that in a kind of nice way. I'm just like, wow, you know, that isn't addressed, or I hadn't thought of it that way. You know, the question is a thought.
Yes.
And every question actually is a statement in disguise as well. You're not trying to disguise, it just is. You can just change it around and it's a statement. And so I welcome that in every way. And I'm glad you got the book. I don't know if you got the bound galley or the real book. Does it have color in it all the way through?
It does. It's beautiful.
Okay. I have never seen that book yet.
You haven't? It arrived on September 7th. So
There it is. I've never seen it.
Wow. So I'm even
that's the first time I've seen the book.
To people.
Yeah.
I mean, beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's far bigger than I thought it was from the initial picture. I thought it was going to be, you know, I don't know, cahier size. And this is more, it's almost like the size of some of my textbooks. But coffee table book is what I call it.
Yeah. It's, of course, coffee table books sit there and just look good.
Well, this one's already dog-eared. So what are you going to do?
Good. Thank you so much.
So today's call to action for our audience, for all of you, is really clear. We can all start by ordering a copy of Paul Hawken's new book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. It's chock full of ideas for how we can all regenerate our precious planet, as we've talked about. It's big, it's beautiful, it's audacious. And it will make a great gift this holiday season too, just in time. I can say this for certain. Mine is already well loved and will be more so in time to come. So to order your copy, you can follow the links provided in my show notes or just visit regeneration.org. I've also been following them on Instagram. They have a very active page. I encourage you to check it out. And if you visit our podcast website, Care More Be Better, you will see an action page with a link to Paul Hawken's Regeneration. I'm also compiling a blog about today's show, which will feature Paul's tips for things you can do to support Earth's regeneration, and a few quotes that I've already extracted from the book. Thank you, listeners, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more.